The attic of our old family home was like a forgotten chapter from a dusty book. Neglected, filled with remnants of the past, and shrouded in mystery. I had always steered clear of its shadowy recesses, feeling uneasy about the creaking floorboards and the way the light barely penetrated its corners. But on a particularly dreary and rain-soaked afternoon, a mixture of boredom and a nagging sense of adventure led me up the narrow, groaning steps into the attic. As I pushed open the door, a musty smell, rich with the scent of old wood and long-forgotten memories, hit me. The attic was full of boxes filled with black and white photos of relatives I never knew, aged furniture draped in ghostly sheets, and trinkets from times gone by. Each object seemed to whisper stories of the past, stories that were now nothing more than echoes. Intrigued, I began to sift through the boxes, touching old leather-bound books, faded letters, and vintage clothing. Time seemed to stretch and bend around me, the rain's rhythmic tapping on the roof a steady accompaniment to my exploration. Then, in a far, dimly lit corner under a pile of old newspapers and knitting supplies, I found it. A small, unassuming wooden box that was out of place amid the relics. The box was simple, yet oddly compelling. Its surface was smooth from age, with a peculiar, almost hypnotic pattern carved into it. The game's title, The Labyrinth of Echoes, was etched into the wood with crude, jagged letters that seemed to dance and flicker as I traced them with my fingers. Inside, the game itself was an enigma, a board crafted with an intricate maze, its pathways and walls inscribed with symbols that felt both ancient and otherworldly. The game pieces were a collection of figures, each carved with exquisite detail, yet their faces were deliberately obscured, as if to hide their true nature. Something about the game felt deeply unsettling, yet irresistibly fascinating. It was as if the game had been waiting for me, lying dormant in the shadows of the attic, biding its time. As I sat there, the attic around me seemed to grow quieter, the rain's patter fading into a hushed silence. I had stumbled upon something truly extraordinary, something that whispered of secrets and mysteries far beyond the mundane confines of my attic. That night, after the rest of the house had surrendered to sleep and the world outside was nothing but a canvas of darkness and the occasional flicker of distant lightning, I found myself drawn to the dining room table where I had left the game. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak and groan of its old bones settling, a soundtrack that seemed eerily fitting as I sat down to play The Labyrinth of Echoes. The game's pieces felt unnaturally cold to the touch, and as I set them up, a feeling of apprehension crept over me, a whispering in the back of my mind warning me to stop. But a strange compulsion pushed me forward, a need to uncover the secrets held within the wooden maze. I rolled the dice, the sound unnaturally loud in the still room, and moved my piece along the twisted paths of the labyrinth. The game's rules were intuitive yet bizarre, guiding me through choices and turns that felt both random and eerily predetermined. With each move, the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift, the shadows cast by the flickering candlelight growing longer and more sinister. As I delved deeper into the game, the air around me grew perceptibly colder. My breath formed misty clouds in the dim light, and I could swear the walls of the room seemed to inch closer, as if constricting around me. The whispers started then, soft and unintelligible, like distant conversations carried by the wind. I was alone, but it felt as if unseen spectators were observing my every move, their breaths a silent chorus accompanying the game's progression. The game board itself began to exhibit strange qualities. The pathways seemed to shift slightly between turns, never drastically, but enough to make me question my memory. The figures, with their obscured faces, appeared to change positions when I looked away, a slow, almost imperceptible dance that defied logic. The symbols etched into the board pulsed faintly, casting eerie patterns on my hands as I reached to move my piece. Each turn I took seemed to bring a new, bizarre event. A picture frame in the room inexplicably fell, shattering the silence with its crash. Shadows in the corner of the room writhed and twisted, forming shapes that were almost human, but grotesquely distorted. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of hushed tones that seemed to be urging me on, deeper into the labyrinth. I wanted to stop, to close the box and forget this ever happened, but each time I tried, a wave of nausea and dizziness overwhelmed me, an invisible force compelling me to continue. It was as if the game had a will of its own, ensnaring me in its intricate web, a puppet tethered to its ancient whims. I began to realize that this was no ordinary attic find. The room spun around me and I was trapped in the center of this maelstrom, a player in a game that played by rules not of this world. As the days blurred into nights, the game began to consume my every thought. The game had cast a spell over me, drawing me back to its twisted pathways and cryptic symbols with an irresistible allure. The house, once a familiar haven, now felt like a mere backdrop to the labyrinth that unfolded on the board. I found myself waking up at odd hours, the echo of the dice rolling in my dreams, leading me back to the game in a half-awake trance. The more I played, the more the boundaries between the game and my reality began to fray. The whispers that had started as a mere background noise were now clear voices, murmuring secrets and warnings in a language I couldn't understand but felt compelled to listen to. Shadows stretched and twisted across the walls, forming shapes that seemed to mock and beckon me. The faces of the game pieces, obscured and mysterious, began to appear in my mind's eye during waking hours, their expressions shifting with my mood, sometimes mocking, sometimes pitying. Daytime brought no respite. Sunlight seemed duller, as if strained through a veil, and the world outside felt distant and unimportant. The people around me, friends, family, seemed like actors in a play I had long outgrown. Their voices were muffled, their concerns trivial, and their presence an unwelcome distraction from the game that called to me with an ever-growing urgency. One evening, as I navigated through a particularly challenging section of the labyrinth, a sudden, sharp pain jolted me back to my senses. Looking down, I saw a small, precise cut on my hand, blood welling up from the wound. In a daze, I watched as the droplets fell onto the board. The moment my blood touched the wooden surface, a deep, resonant vibration emanated from the game, and the room around me seemed to shift. The walls pulsed as if breathing, the shadows danced with renewed fervor, and the whispers crescendoed into an overwhelming chorus. I realized then that I was no longer playing the game. I was part of it, a pawn in a grand, malevolent scheme that stretched beyond the confines of my understanding. The labyrinth was not confined to the wooden board. It had begun to manifest in my world, twisting the fabric of my reality into its own malevolent design. From that night on, sleep became elusive. My dreams were haunted by endless corridors, each turn revealing more of the labyrinth's intricate design, mirroring the game's ever-evolving complexity. I would wake up with a start, my heart racing, only to find that the separation between dream and waking life was growing thinner. The game's presence was everywhere, in the whisper of the wind, in the creak of the floorboards, in the very air I breathed. The resolution to my harrowing journey would only lay in its completion. It was my only option. Each move I made was a calculated dance with the unknown, the atmosphere thickening around me like a tangible shroud. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, stretching towards me like dark, grasping fingers, eager to pull me into their abyss. As I maneuvered my piece through the winding paths of the board, I felt the oppressive weight of the game's presence bearing down on me. The air grew colder, each breath I took hanging in the air like a ghostly mist. The walls of my room seemed to pulse with a sinister life, their surfaces rippling as if they were a mere illusion. Finally, with a trembling hand, I placed my piece in the center of the labyrinth. The moment was surreal, time itself seeming to pause. A profound silence enveloped the room, so intense that it felt like a physical force. The oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, giving way to an even more unnerving calm. It was in this eerie stillness that I felt it, an ancient, malevolent presence observing me, its focus palpable and overwhelming.